My father died on a Tuesday. By Thursday, a woman I had never met was sitting in my lawyer's office claiming that her 2 children, my father's children, she said, were entitled to a share of his estate. My father had been married to my mother for 31 years. He had died of pancreatic cancer, a diagnosis we had known about for 8 months, which we had spent as a family, my mother, my sister, and I, in an arrangement of caregiving, financial planning, and grief that I would not wish on anyone. During those 8 months, at no point had my father mentioned that he had fathered 2 children with another woman, a woman named Renata, children who were apparently 12 and 15 years old. The math is simple and brutal. My father had begun an affair when I was 19. He had maintained it, or some version of it, for years. He had fathered 2 children and kept their existence from his wife and daughters for over a decade. And now, the secret had arrived, dressed in business casual, holding a DNA test and a lawyer's card. This is the story of what happened next. Hello everyone. Please subscribe if you haven't. We're growing and your support matters enormously. Now let's continue.
I want to tell you who my father was, or who I believed him to be, before I tell you who he apparently also was.
His name was Thomas. He was a civil engineer. He was a tall man who wore the same 4 or 5 button-down shirts in rotation and who had been making the same joke about the thermostat since I was approximately 6 years old. He coached my sister's soccer team when she was in middle school. He drove my mother to every medical appointment after her knee surgery and waited in the waiting room reading actual paper magazines. He was not a perfect father. He could be emotionally distant in the way of men of his generation and profession, competent at action, less fluent in feeling. He was not the father who had long conversations about inner lives. He was the father who showed up, reliably, consistently, physically present. I loved him without reservation. When the cancer diagnosis came, I took 6 weeks of FMLA leave from my job to be home. I'm a software engineer with a fully remote setup. I was able to work part-time from my parents' house and be present for the rest of it. I drove my father to chemo. I sat with him when he was sick afterward. I watched him diminish over 8 months in a way that I will spend years processing. He died in September. He was 62.
The funeral was well attended. My father had professional connections, neighborhood connections, an extended family with reasonable warmth. My mother was held up by her sister and by the particular dignity of a woman who has been with someone for 31 years and knows how to do the public part of grief, even when the private part is unspeakable.
My sister and I were in the reception line. It is a strange thing, a reception line at a funeral. You shake hands with people you know slightly and people you don't know at all, and everyone says some version of the same things, and you nod and you say thank you and you try not to collapse. A woman came through the line who I did not recognize. She was perhaps 40, brown-haired, well-dressed, clearly composed in the manner of someone working to maintain composure. She shook my hand and said she was sorry for my loss. She held my hand a moment longer than customary. She looked at me with an expression I could not immediately parse. She said her name was Renata. I did not know who she was. I said thank you and she moved on. I did not think about her again until Thursday.
2 days after the funeral, my mother's attorney, a woman named Helen who had handled my parents' estate planning, called to say that a representative for a woman named Renata had contacted her office. She explained the claim being made. I will summarize. Renata maintained that she and my father had a long-term relationship that had produced 2 children. She had documentation, a prior paternity acknowledgement apparently, and she was asserting that the children had rights under state inheritance law as biological descendants of my father.
My mother, who was on the call, said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Can you give me a moment?" Helen said, "Of course." My mother set the phone down. I could hear her breathing. Then she picked it back up and said, "What do we do?"
In the weeks that followed, we learned the following. My father had met Renata approximately 15 years ago through a professional conference. The relationship had continued intermittently over several years. Renata's older child, a son named Eli, was 15. Her younger daughter, Sophia, was 12. My father had apparently provided financial support to Renata's household over the years in amounts that had been structured. Our forensic accountant would later confirm, to avoid appearing in the family's joint finances. He had maintained a separate checking account we had not known about. He had, in other words, maintained a second financial infrastructure for over a decade. Not a casual affair, a sustained parallel commitment.
I want to tell you honestly how this information landed. The grief about my father's death and the grief about my father's deception arrived simultaneously, and they were not compatible. I was mourning the man I thought I knew, while also discovering that I had been, in some meaningful sense, wrong about who that man was. These two experiences fought each other constantly in the weeks after the funeral. My mother was worse. She is a private person, and I will not describe her experience in detail, but I will say that watching my mother absorb the realization that 31 years of marriage had contained this significant concealed life, was one of the most painful things I have witnessed.
Renata's position, as communicated through her attorney, was as follows. Eli and Sophia were biological children of my father, with documentation to support this. Under applicable state law, biological children have inheritance rights, regardless of circumstances of birth, in the absence of a valid disinheritance document. My father had not created such a document. Therefore, Eli and Sophia were entitled to a share of the estate. The estate, for context, consisted of my parents' home, mortgage-free, value approximately $580,000, retirement accounts, life insurance proceeds, and various savings, a total of roughly $1.4 million, most of which my mother was entitled to as surviving spouse. What remained after spousal entitlements, an amount in the range of $300,000 to $400,000 designated for heirs, was what Renata was seeking a portion of on behalf of her children. The legal claim was not frivolous. Our attorney was honest with us about that. State law does not discriminate between children based on the circumstances of their conception. Eli and Sophia, if biological paternity was confirmed, had a real argument. I will be honest about my initial reaction because I think it is important to be honest about the full range of what I felt. I was angry. I wanted to fight. I wanted to protect my mother and my family's resources from a woman who had, as I saw it, participated in something that had caused enormous harm and was now arriving to benefit from it. I hired a probate litigation attorney, separate from my mother's estate attorney, named Marcus, who specialized in contested inheritance cases. I wanted an independent assessment. He told me, after reviewing the documentation, that Renata's children had a genuine claim that was unlikely to be dismissed, that fighting it outright would be expensive and emotionally costly, and would likely fail, and that a negotiated resolution was probably in my family's best interest. I did not want to hear this. I listened anyway. My sister's name is Caroline. She is 3 years older than me and has always been the more pragmatic of the two of us. She processed the deception quickly, not without pain but quickly, and arrived at a position before I did. She said, Eli and Sophia didn't choose this. They didn't choose to be born to a man who didn't tell his actual family they existed. They're kids, a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old who just lost their father, the only father they knew, and are now in the middle of an estate dispute through no fault of their own. I said I knew that. She said, then what are we actually fighting? I thought about it. I was not fighting the children. I was fighting the injustice of the situation, the reward for wrongdoing quality of Renata and her children receiving any benefit from my father's deception. But Caroline was right that Eli and Sophia were not Renata. They were children who had lost their father. That realization shifted something for me. Not entirely, but enough. Our attorneys negotiated for about 3 months. My mother was the central decision maker, which was appropriate. The majority of the estate was hers, and she was the most directly wronged party. I want to say something about my mother here that I think is important. She was remarkable. Underneath the grief and the devastation was a woman who had raised 2 daughters to think clearly, and she thought clearly. She was not vindictive. She was not performing magnanimity. She was doing the actual work of figuring out what was right in an impossible situation. The final settlement gave Eli and Sophia a combined total of $95,000. Structured into an educational trust that could only be accessed for qualified educational expenses. It was a significantly smaller amount than a court might have awarded. It was structured in a way that ensured the money served the children, rather than flowing through Renata. Renata did not get anything directly. Her attorney pushed for more. We held firm. My mother signed the agreement without visible emotion. That night she called me and cried for a long time on the phone, and I let her, and I didn't try to fix it. Chapter 9. What I think about Eli and Sophia. I have not met them. I may never meet them. I do not know whether their mother has told them the full context of the situation, or some version of it that serves her narrative, but I think about them sometimes, especially Eli, 15, old enough to understand that something complicated is happening, not old enough to fully comprehend it. He grew up knowing his father visited sometimes. He grew up with a financial support arrangement that he probably didn't fully understand. He grew up as a secondary secret, which is its own kind of damage regardless of the financial dimensions. He is, technically, my half-brother. That is a strange and disorienting sentence to write. I have no relationship with him, and I do not know if I ever will. I have no hostility toward him. I simply do not know what to do with that fact, and I am allowing myself to not know for now. I have had to rebuild my understanding of my father from the ground up. Not completely. I do not believe that people are only the worst things they do, and I do not believe that the father I knew was entirely a fiction. But I also cannot pretend that the concealment didn't happen, that it didn't represent a sustained, active choice made over 15 years, that it didn't cause real harm to real people. My mother, my sister, me, and 2 children who deserved better. I have been in therapy since shortly after the funeral. My therapist has helped me hold both things simultaneously. The real love I have for the man who drove me to every piano recital and taught me to drive in an empty parking lot, and the real anger I have at the man who looked at my mother across the dinner table for 15 years while maintaining a separate family. I have not arrived at a resolution. I am not sure I ever will. I am arriving at a coexistence, a way of carrying both the love and the grief and the betrayal without letting any one of them consume the others. My mother sold the family home and moved to a smaller condominium closer to my sister. She is 60 years old and has something like a new beginning ahead of her, which I know she doesn't entirely feel yet, but which I believe in for her. My sister has channeled her energy into a focused, clear-eyed approach to the present, which is characteristically her. I am back at work. I am in therapy. I am running in the mornings, which I took up during my father's illness as a way of having 1 hour a day that was entirely mine. I think about what I would say to my father if I could. I have had those imaginary conversations many times. In the most honest version of the conversation, I tell him that I love him, and I am furious at him, and I miss him, and I needed him to have been better than he was. In my imagination, he understands all of that. He does not explain it away. I'm not sure what else I would want from him. Maybe just that. I'm going to be okay. We all are. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, please share it and subscribe. More stories coming soon.